Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're diving into Dustin Mattison's approach to teaching.
Okay.
And he uses this visual tool called a fractal grid
Right.
to represent different learning environments. And it draws on this whole red oceans and blue oceans metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of this before?
Yeah. What's interesting is that this fractal grid idea is based on this model for ethical decision making.
Oh, really?
And this model maps out human experiences across what are called the SEIP domains.
SEIP domains.
Yeah. Spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and physical.
Okay, wait a minute. SEIP domains, fractal grid. I'm getting a little lost here.
Yeah.
Let me back up for a sec.
Sure.
What is this fractal grid and how does it actually connect to teaching and these SEIP domains?
So picture a grid like a graph.
Okay.
This grid represents different learning environments, and it uses the red oceans and blue oceans metaphor.
Okay.
So red oceans, think of those as like traditional restrictive learning environments, like a classroom where it's all about tests and memorization,
Got it.
where students are just expected to follow the rules.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm seeing where this is going. So the blue ocean would be the opposite then.
Exactly.
Or free flowing and creative.
Yeah, moving away from rigid structures and encouraging things like curiosity and creativity and self-directed learning.
So it's a place where students can explore
Mm-hmm.
what they're into and kind of take charge of their learning.
Exactly.
Now, where do these CAP domains fit into all of this?
Right.
You said spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and physical. It seems like a pretty big range.
It is a big range, but each of these domains plays a role in this journey from the red ocean to the blue ocean.
Okay.
So, for example, let's take the intellectual domain.
Okay.
In a red ocean, learning might just be memorizing facts and following instructions. But
Right.
in a blue ocean, you're talking about critical thinking, questioning, exploring ideas.
So it's not just about the subject, but how students approach learning and how they develop these different skills.
Exactly. And each domain kind of comes into play. So, like with the emotional domain, it's all about how students feel. Are they afraid to make mistakes? Or are they encouraged to take risks?
Right.
The spiritual domain is about connecting learning to something bigger, like finding meaning in what you're studying.
Mm-hmm.
And the physical domain looks at the actual environment and activities, like are students stuck in a traditional classroom or are they getting to do hands-on projects?
Got it. So the fractal grid, it's like a map that shows how these different aspects of learning the AP domains
Yeah.
play out in those different environments.
Right. And if you look at the grid itself, the vertical axis represents this spectrum of good versus evil or entropy.
Okay.
You could think of good as like knowledge and growth,
Mm-hmm.
and evil or entropy being the opposite, like ignorant stagnation.
Okay.
And the horizontal axis that shows the range between delight and pain during learning.
So we're not actually talking about good and evil here, right?
Right.
It's more about the impact of the learning experience.
Exactly. It's all about moving towards learning that's high in good, low in evil, high in delight, and low in pain.
So basically creating an environment where students can really grow and understand and enjoy what they're learning.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does all of this actually work in practice?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we've got these axes, we've got these domains, we've got red oceans and blue oceans.
Right.
But what does it actually look like in a classroom?
So think about the grid divided into 4 quadrants.
Okay.
Each one represents a different learning experience with like varying levels of structure freedom,
Okay.
and focus on those AIP domains.
Right.
The top left quadrant, that's what's called the blue ocean experience.
Okay.
That's like the ideal learning environment, high in intellectual and emotional stimulation, and where students have a strong sense of agency.
That sounds amazing. Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Yeah, so imagine a classroom where students are researching a topic they're passionate about.
Yeah.
They choose their own questions, they design their own investigations, maybe they even work with experts outside of the classroom. They're taking ownership driven by their own curiosity.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I see how that would really tap into those EIP domains we were talking about.
Right.
The intellectual curiosity, the emotional engagement,
Yes.
even like a spiritual connection, if they feel like their work has a larger purpose.
Exactly. And of course, the physical environment would support that,
Yeah.
with resources and technology and space for collaboration.
Okay. And how does that contrast with the top right quadrant you said that was like fear, failure, and compliance-based learning or something?
Fear, failure, and compliance. Yeah, so that's more of that red ocean territory.
Okay. Got it.
So think of a classroom where it's all about standardized tests.
Okay.
Memorizing facts, getting the right answer. Students are afraid to make mistakes or even ask questions because they're worried about their grades.
So it's more about following the rules than actually understanding and exploring,
Right, and that can really limit growth.
especially intellectual and emotional growth.
Exactly. It can make students feel scared and anxious about learning, which is the opposite of what we want.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got this contrast between the freedom and exploration of the blue ocean and the constraints of the red ocean. But I'm guessing there's more to it than just those two extremes.
You're right. The bottom two quadrants on the grid, those are the environments that are somewhere in between.
Okay.
They highlight that transition from red ocean to blue ocean thinking.
So those are where things start to get really interesting,
Yes.
where we can see how to actually move towards that more engaging and empowering learning experience.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look closer at those environments and how Mattison actually uses the grid in his teaching
Awesome.
and how it all connects to his overall teaching purpose.
Sounds good to me. We'll be back in a moment to continue our deep dive into Dustin Mattison's teaching approach. All right, so we've got those contrasting learning environments, the red ocean and the blue ocean. And we even touched on those two quadrants on the grid.
Yeah.
Well, what about those other two quadrants? You know, the ones that kind of bridge the gap between the extremes.
Yeah, those are where things get really interesting. The bottom left quadrant, that's what Mattison calls interdisciplinary exploration.
Yeah.
So you see in traditional red ocean, learning subjects are taught in isolation, right?
Yeah, like math is separate from science, history is separate from literature.
Exactly. But in this quadrant, we start to like break down those barriers.
So it's about making connections between different subjects, showing how they relate to each other and the real world.
Exactly. Imagine a classroom where students are studying the history of a particular region.
Okay.
But instead of just memorizing dates and names, they're also exploring like the geography, the culture, the scientific discoveries of that time period.
Oh, wow.
They might even like create art or music inspired by what they're learning.
I can see how that would make learning so much richer and more engaging.
Right. It's not just about like absorbing information in isolation. It's about understanding how it all fits together.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of interdisciplinary exploration is a key step toward that blue ocean environment.
It encourages that critical thinking and creativity and a deeper level of understanding.
Exactly.
Now, what about that last quadrant, the bottom right?
That one that represents the red ocean experience, think about a classroom where the teacher is the sole authority.
Okay.
The curriculum is super rigid and there's not much room for student choice or exploration.
So this is like the most restrictive learning environment where those red ocean constraints are like really strong.
Yeah, it might be necessary sometimes,
Yeah.
Especially for establishing those like basic knowledge or skills.
Right.
But if students stay in that environment for too long, it can really stifle their growth.
Yeah, got it. So the fractal grid, it shows us this whole spectrum of learning environments, from the restrictive red ocean to the expansive blue ocean. But how does Mattison actually use this grid to guide his teaching practices? I mean, is it just a theoretical model, or does it actually have like practical application?
Well, that's the cool thing about it. It's both.
Oh, really?
He uses the grid as like a roadmap, a way to design learning experiences that intentionally move students towards that blue ocean environment.
Okay.
But he doesn't just throw them in the deep end right away.
Right.
He knows that structure and guidance are important, especially at the beginning.
So he might start in that more red ocean environment, to provide that foundational knowledge and structure,
Yeah.
and then gradually move towards a blue ocean approach as students become more confident and skilled.
Precisely. He actually talks about this yellow arrow on the grid.
Okay, yellow arrow.
Yeah, it symbolizes that journey from compliance-based learning to self-directed discovery.
So it's not about getting rid of structure altogether,
No.
but about changing it into something that supports exploration and growth.
Exactly. Can you give me an example what that might look like?
Yeah, that would be great.
Let's say you're teaching a history lesson about the American Revolution.
Okay.
You might start with a traditional lecture, providing the basic facts and context.
Right.
But then you could have students work in groups to research different perspectives on the war, or create presentations, or even write and perform a short play based on historical events.
Oh, wow.
You're gradually shifting from a teacher-centered approach to a more student-centered one.
Yeah, I like that you're giving them that foundation,
Yeah.
but then encouraging them to take ownership of their learning,
Right.
dig deeper, to be creative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like you said, transforming that structure into a springboard for exploration.
And as students move along that yellow arrow, they're also developing those SEIP domains we talked about.
Yeah, that's right.
Becoming more intellectually curious, emotionally resilient, and even spiritually connected to their learning.
Yes.
Now, I'm curious about Mattison's overall teaching purpose? Like, what are his core values and beliefs about education? And how does the fractal grid reflect those notes?
That's a great question. If you look at his teaching philosophy, he really emphasizes a few key things.
Okay.
Sparking agency in students, creating spaces for curiosity and creativity, and embracing uncertainty as a crucial part of growth.
And all of these ideas really align with that blue ocean learning environment.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about teaching a particular subject,
No.
but about empowering students to become those lifelong learners, those critical thinkers, those engaged citizens.
He believes that education should be about more than just acquiring knowledge. It should be about developing the whole person, nurturing their intellectual, emotional, and spiritual growth.
That makes a lot of sense, but how does he actually incorporate those SEP domains into his curriculum? Can you give me some specific examples?
Sure, let's take the spiritual domain, for example.
Right.
Madison believes that connecting learning to a larger purpose can be super motivating for students. So he might have them reflect on how their studies relate to real-world issues, or how they can use their knowledge to make a positive impact in their community.
So it's about finding meaning and relevance in their learning, seeing that bigger picture.
Exactly. And in terms of the emotional domain,
Okay.
he focuses on creating a really supportive and inclusive classroom where students feel safe to take risks, share their ideas, and, learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
He encourages open dialogue and constructive feedback, and this helps students develop resilience and a growth mindset.
It sounds like he's creating a space where students feel valued and respected,
Right.
where they're not afraid to be themselves and to really push themselves intellectually.
Exactly. And that kind of environment is essential for fostering those blue ocean qualities.
Yeah.
Curiosity, creativity, a love of learning.
Yeah, when it comes to the intellectual domain, Madison really emphasizes critical thinking skills, right?
He does. He encourages students to question everything, to analyze information from different perspectives, and to come to their own conclusions based on evidence.
So it's not about memorizing facts and figures. It's about learning how to think for themselves, how to evaluate information and form their own opinions.
Precisely. He wants to give them the tools they need to be successful in a world that's constantly changing
Right.
and where information is readily available but not always reliable.
That's so important, especially now. And finally, the physical domain. How does Madison bring that into his teaching?
Well, he knows that learning is not just a mental activity, it's a physical one too. So he includes hands-on activities, project-based learning, and real-world experiences in his curriculum.
Okay.
This might involve fieldwork experiments, building models, or even creating art or music related to what they're studying.
So it's about making learning tangible and experiential and connecting it to the world outside the classroom.
Exactly. And by engaging multiple senses and providing opportunities for active learning, he's creating a more well-rounded and impactful learning experience.
This is all really insightful, but some people might argue that this blue ocean learning environment, while appealing, could lead to a lack of structure and discipline. How would Madison respond to that?
Well, he definitely acknowledges that tension.
Okay.
Madison wouldn't advocate for just abandoning all structure. Remember, the fractal grid isn't about picking one extreme over the other.
Right.
It's about finding that balance. He believes that structure is still important,
Okay.
but it needs to be flexible and adaptable, providing a framework for exploration.
So it's not about chaos versus order.
No.
It's about finding that sweet spot where structure and freedom can work together.
Exactly. Think of a jazz band.
Oh, okay.
There's structure to the music, a melody, a rhythm, but within that structure, there's room for improvisation, creativity, and individual expression.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It's about having that foundation, but allowing for that freedom to explore and create within it. Now, what about assessment in this blue ocean environment? Does traditional grading even fit into this model?
That's a great question. Madison believes that assessment should be more than just a way to measure achievement. It should be a tool for learning and growth. So he advocates for more authentic forms of assessment that allow students to show their understanding in meaningful ways.
So things like projects, presentations, portfolios,
Yeah.
rather than just standardized tests.
Exactly. Assessments that let students apply their knowledge, show their creativity, and reflect on their learning process.
And that feedback loop is so crucial, right?
It is.
Providing students with that constructive criticism and guidance to help them improve.
Absolutely. Feedback is such an important part of learning. It's about helping students understand their strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah.
identify areas for improvement, and develop that growth mindset we talked about.
In an ongoing process, not just a final judgment.
Right.
It sounds like he's really challenging those traditional ideas about assessment, moving away from that red ocean mentality of grades and rankings,
He is.
and quote, a more holistic and individualized approach.
And that's what makes his approach so innovative and inspiring. It's about shifting the focus from memorization and compliance to a deeper understanding, critical thinking, and personal growth. It's about empowering students to become those lifelong learners who are curious, adaptable, and engaged with the world.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into Mattison's teaching philosophy.
It has.
His fractal grid is a really thought-provoking model, and not just for educators, but for anyone interested in creating those more engaging learning experiences.
It really challenges us to rethink, our assumptions about education and to explore new possibilities for how we teach and learn.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from those contrasting red ocean and blue ocean environments to those SEIP domains and the practical applications of the fractal grid.
Right.
But before we wrap up, I want to give you, our listeners, something to think about. Think about your own learning experiences. Maybe it's a course you're taking, a skill you're developing, or just something you're curious about.
Right.
If you were to map your learning journey on this fractal grid, where would you place yourself right now?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Are you swimming in that red ocean, or are you exploring that blue ocean?
And more importantly, what steps could you take to move more towards that blue ocean experience?
Yeah.
What are those red ocean constraints that might be holding you back? Is it fear of failure, lack of structure, or maybe just not knowing where to begin?
It's about recognizing those constraints, but not letting them, define your learning journey. Remember that yellow arrow, that journey from compliance to discovery.
Yeah.
It's a process, and we can all take those steps to move in that direction.
Even those small changes can make a huge difference.
For sure.
Maybe it's choosing to learn something that you're really interested in instead of something you feel like you have to learn.
Right.
Or maybe it's finding resources and communities that support a more self-directed learning approach.
It could also be about incorporating those EIP domains into your learning.
Right.
Think about how you can make your learning more intellectually stimulating, more emotionally engaging, or even spiritually meaningful.
If you're learning a new language, don't just focus on grammar and vocab. Immerse yourself in the culture, connect with native speakers, explore the literature and music.
Right.
Make it an experience that engages your whole self,
Mind, your heart.
Exactly.
And don't be afraid to experiment, to try new things, to get out of your comfort zone.
That's right.
Remember, the blue ocean is all about exploration and discovery. It's about finding that joy in learning itself, not just the end result.
That is so important. The journey is just as important as the destination.
Absolutely.
Embracing that journey with all of its ups and downs.
Yeah.
That's where the real growth happens.
So as you navigate your own learning map,
right,
remember to embrace those blue ocean principles.
Yes.
Be curious, be creative, be courageous.
Challenge those red ocean constraints and never stop exploring.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
You don't.
Find mentors, connect with other learners.
Right.
Build a community that supports your growth and exploration. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dives into Dustin Mattison's teaching philosophy.
It does.
And his really interesting fractal grid model. Hopefully you found it insightful and inspiring.
It's a good reminder that learning is a continuous adventure.
It is.
And that we all have the power to shape that adventure, to move from those red oceans to the possibilities of the blue ocean.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
See ya.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing those boundaries.